Title: Inside Atlanta's Most Out-of-Control Jail. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. Atlanta is a city known for its music, its culture, its ambition. But a few miles from the bright lights downtown stands a very different world. A world most people never see, yet nearly everyone in Atlanta has heard whispers about. Fulton County Jail, better known to locals simply as Rice Street. For decades, it has been described with the same words over and over again: overcrowded, understaffed, unsafe. But the deeper truth, the truth hidden behind concrete walls and locked metal doors, is far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than any headline can capture. The problems didn't appear overnight. They built slowly, layer by layer. Thousands of inmates awaiting trial, many who couldn't afford even a few $100s in bail. Atlanta's rapid growth brought more arrests, more cases, more traffic in the courts, but the jail itself stayed almost exactly the same. And when a system grows while its foundation stays still, the cracks begin to widen. By 2022 and 2023, reports began revealing what staff and inmates already knew. Fulton County Jail was breaking under its own weight. The facility was built for around 2,200 people, but the population often pushed far above that. Jail corridors filled with mattresses on the floor. Cells meant for two held 3 or 4. And with overcrowding came tension that could escalate in seconds. Then came a case that shocked the nation: the death of LaShawn Thompson, a man suffering from mental illness who was found in a filthy cell in the jail's psychiatric wing. Public outrage exploded. Activists protested. Families demanded answers. National media flooded Atlanta. It wasn't just about one man. His death represented something larger, the entire system failing the people inside it. By the time lawsuits, federal investigations, and public pressure surged, the city had little choice. Leaders from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office to the county commissioners acknowledged the crisis. The jail was over capacity, understaffed, and deeply outdated. But fixing it wouldn't be simple. Inmates continued reporting conditions that no human being should experience in a modern American city. Some said the plumbing in their cells barely worked. Others described mold, insects, and long stretches of time without being allowed outside. People with severe mental health needs waited days, sometimes weeks, to see professionals. And with too many people and too few officers, violence became an ever-present threat. Officers themselves struggled. Many worked double shifts. Some quit after only a few weeks. Others admitted they feared for their safety as much as the inmates did. The deeper you look into Atlanta's jail system, the clearer one truth becomes: nothing inside those walls is simple. Many inmates aren't convicted of anything. They are simply waiting for court dates delayed again and again, waiting for public defenders overwhelmed with hundreds of cases, waiting for a judge, waiting for freedom, or for the system to remember their name. Some inmates wait months for cases as small as trespassing or a misdemeanor. Others wait years for serious charges that drag through the courts. A justice system cannot function like this, and yet in Atlanta this is the reality. Officials argue that the jail isn't just overcrowded, it's outdated. Built in the 1980s, it wasn't designed for today's population, today's mental health struggles, or today's gang activity. The structure itself has become part of the problem. Old locks, malfunctioning doors, limited space, aging pipes, and an entire layout that is too small for a city this large. In recent years, Atlanta leaders have debated replacing Fulton County Jail entirely, suggesting a new facility costing more than $1 billion. Others argue that the real solution lies outside the jail: fixing court delays, investing in mental health treatment, expanding pretrial services, and reducing the number of people sitting behind bars simply because they're poor. But for the people trapped inside, debates don't change the day-to-day reality. Inside the walls, men and women fight to stay safe, stay sane, and stay hopeful in a place where time stretches and days blur together. Guards work under pressure that few outsiders can imagine. Families wait by phones hoping loved ones will call. And the entire city feels the consequences of a system struggling to keep up. Atlanta is changing, growing, moving forward. But on Rice Street, time works differently: slow, heavy, and unforgiving. As the problems inside Atlanta's jail system grew, a new truth started to emerge. This wasn't just a crisis of buildings and budgets. It was a crisis of people, each one carrying a story that rarely made it past the steel doors. Behind the overcrowded cells and failing infrastructure were men and women who were caught in a system too slow to protect them, too overwhelmed to help them, and often too understaffed to keep them safe. For many inmates, the biggest threat inside Atlanta's jails wasn't another prisoner, it was time. Time without answers. Time without court dates. Time without sunlight or space to breathe. Some waited months for hearings on charges as small as shoplifting or trespassing. Others sat for years on serious charges that moved through the courts at a crawl. The Sixth Amendment promises every American the right to a speedy trial. But in Atlanta, speedy became a word that felt more like a distant hope. Public defenders carried caseloads so large that many could only meet clients for minutes at a time. Judges rotated through crowded dockets trying to clear backlogs that had been growing long before the pandemic slowed everything down even more. For the people inside, the impact was devastating. A young man arrested on a probation violation found himself waiting almost 9 months without seeing a courtroom. A woman held on a low-level drug charge missed critical medical treatments because her hearings kept getting pushed back. A father arrested on a traffic warrant lost his job and apartment while waiting in jail longer than the sentence he would have received if convicted. The system wasn't intentionally cruel, but the result felt the same. People who had not been found guilty of anything were living in conditions many described as inhumane. And then there was the violence. Fulton County Jail became known for its alarming number of stabbings, fights, and inmate-on-inmate assaults. With overcrowding came tension, and with understaffing came fewer eyes watching the floors. Some officers admitted they were outnumbered to the point where responding to fights felt like choosing between two bad options: intervene and risk escalation, or stay back and call for backup that might take too long to arrive. Inmates realized that in some areas of the jail, violence could erupt in seconds. Weapons, pieces of metal shaved from bed frames or torn from ventilation units, circulated constantly. The fear of being attacked was something nearly everyone lived with, especially those new to jail or those without a clique or gang affiliation for protection. But not every story was violent. Many inmates spoke about the emotional weight of being forgotten. They talked about missing their children's birthdays, losing loved ones on the outside, or watching their mental health decline as days in a small, dirty cell turned into weeks and months. Mental health cases were among the most vulnerable. Atlanta's jails housed hundreds of people with diagnosed mental illnesses: depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and more. Some came in stable but struggled without consistent treatment. Others arrived already in crisis, only to find themselves placed in isolation cells with little natural light and minimal therapeutic support. The death of LaShawn Thompson at Fulton County Jail exposed just how broken the system had become for mentally ill inmates. His passing led to national headlines, lawsuits, and public outcry, but most importantly, it forced the city to reevaluate how it cared for its most vulnerable detainees. The tragedy sparked calls from activists demanding better mental health facilities, more medical staff, and alternatives to incarceration for people struggling with psychiatric conditions. But progress was slow and the problems continued. Meanwhile, correctional officers found themselves in impossible positions. Many worked 12 to 16-hour shifts, sometimes 6 or 7 days a week. Recruiting new staff was difficult. Few people wanted to work in facilities consistently labeled as dangerous, overcrowded, and understaffed. Some officers said that despite the dangers, they stayed because they felt responsible for the people inside. Others admitted they stayed because they needed the paycheck and benefits to support their families. But almost all agreed on one thing: the jail was stretched to its breaking point. By 2023 and 2024, Fulton County Sheriff Patrick Labatt made a public push for change, calling for a new billion-dollar facility to replace the aging jail, more resources for mental health treatment, and reforms to reduce overcrowding. Community members debated the solutions. Some argued that building a new jail would only expand incarceration. Others believed it was necessary for safety and dignity. Everyone agreed on one fact: the current system was failing everyone inside it. In the middle of those debates were the people who lived and worked behind the walls. Inmates praying for court dates, officers doing their best with limited resources, families waiting for answers, and a city trying to balance justice, safety, and humanity. Atlanta's jail crisis wasn't just a legal issue. It was a human story, one that would only become more urgent as time went on. The breaking point and the cost of silence. By the time Atlanta's jail crisis reached the national conversation, one message became impossible to ignore: the system wasn't breaking, it was already broken. And the cost wasn't just measured in lawsuits, headlines, or dollars. It was measured in human lives. Federal investigators, civil rights groups, local journalists, and grieving families all arrived at the same conclusion: what was happening inside Fulton County Jail, and the surrounding county jails in the metro area, was not a temporary problem. It was the result of decades of pressure building with no release valve. It wasn't just the overcrowding, the outdated infrastructure, the leaking pipes, or the broken locks that placed the jail under a microscope. It was the stories, the individual stories, that proved the system had reached its breaking point. One such story came from a man arrested on a shoplifting charge who ended up in the same cell block as inmates accused of murder. He warned the courts again and again that he felt unsafe. Months passed without a hearing. When officers finally checked on him after a night of unrest, he had been badly assaulted. His case raised uncomfortable questions. How could someone who hadn't even been convicted be placed in such danger? Why did he wait months for a hearing on a case that should have been resolved in days? Then there were the stories of mental health patients, people cycling in and out of jail not because they were dangerous, but because there was nowhere else for them to go. Police officers admitted privately that they sometimes hesitated before making arrests on low-level charges, knowing the jail environment could be more harmful than helpful. The deeper federal investigators looked, the more they found that the jail had quietly become one of Atlanta's largest mental health institutions, despite being ill-equipped for that role. The psychiatric unit, under constant pressure and short-staffed, struggled to manage inmates with severe conditions. Some were placed in isolation, others went days without seeing specialists, and many were kept in cells that advocates described as unfit for humans. LaShawn Thompson's death wasn't the first of its kind, but it was the case that finally forced Atlanta to confront what was happening behind the walls. Photos released by his family triggered outrage across the country. Celebrities, activists, and national news outlets demanded accountability. Within weeks, Atlanta's political leaders were sitting in emergency meetings discussing reforms the public should have never had to demand in the first place. But even as change slowly began, the problems didn't disappear. The jail continued to record deaths, some from medical issues, others from violence, and many from circumstances that were still being investigated. Activists argued that these deaths weren't anomalies, they were symptoms of a system pushed beyond its limits. And yet, inside the jail, life went on. Correctional officers arrived each morning, stepping into corridors where tension simmered in the air. Many of them, young, overworked, and underpaid, carried the weight of responsibility that came with guarding thousands of people. They faced verbal threats, sudden fights, and near-constant pressure. Some officers described their job as a daily test of patience and fear. Others said they stayed because they believed in their duty to keep people safe. Still, the job took a toll. High turnover meant officers were often replaced by new recruits with little training. Some lasted only weeks. Others pushed through months or years, watching the same problems repeat until exhaustion turned to numbness. Families of inmates, meanwhile, navigated a maze of unanswered questions and bureaucratic barriers. Some waited days to hear why their loved one had been moved or why they had not received medical treatment. Others fought in courtrooms for answers they feared they would never get. The emotional weight of the crisis extended far beyond the jail's walls, reaching living rooms, dinner tables, and quiet moments of worry across the city. Community groups began organizing protests in town halls. Churches mobilized volunteers to support inmates with food, hygiene items, letters, and advocacy. Lawyers filed wrongful death suits, demanding transparency and reform. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering emails, inspection reports, and records showing that officials had known about the problems for years. And then came the biggest debate of all: should Atlanta build a new jail? Fulton County Sheriff Patrick Labatt believed they should. In public statements, he argued that the existing jail was too old, too damaged, and too overcrowded to repair. He described conditions as unsustainable and even dangerous for staff and inmates alike. But not everyone agreed. Activist groups countered that building a bigger jail would simply create more space to incarcerate people, especially poor, mentally ill, and marginalized individuals. They argued that the real solution was to fix the court backlog, expand diversion programs, invest in housing, and increase access to mental health support. Between these two visions, one focused on safety and new construction, the other focused on reform and alternatives, the city found itself split. Meanwhile, federal investigations intensified. The U.S. Department of Justice launched a civil rights probe into the Fulton County jail system, citing concerns about inmate deaths, excessive force, and dangerous conditions. The investigation was still ongoing, but early language in federal filings was blunt. Atlanta's jail system was failing to protect people in its custody. The pressure for reform grew stronger. Some small improvements began. New staff recruitment efforts, increased mental health screenings, more transparency around deaths and incidents, expanded community programs aimed at reducing jail populations. But even those inside the system acknowledge that real change would take years and billions of dollars. And for the thousands of people still inside those walls today, time is the one thing they don't have. They live day to day, hoping for a court date, hoping for safety, hoping that someone on the outside cares enough to keep fighting. For Atlanta, the jail crisis is not just a political problem. It is a reflection of what happens when a city grows faster than its justice system can support. A reflection of how easy it is to forget the people society would rather not see. A reflection of the line between punishment and humanity, a line that, in Atlanta, has grown dangerously thin. As the city debates the future, one truth remains clear. The cost of doing nothing is measured in human lives. And every day that passes, the system reminds everyone, inmates, officers, families, and the city, that reform is not just necessary. It's urgent.